Hello, friends, and welcome to my channel. It is Dr. Shani here, and today I'm going to talk about a very important topic on estate planning, and it is how to create a will. As you all know, I recently lost my parents, Cassie and Charles Collins, in 2023 and 2024. And it was a process dealing with aging parents, just really walking them home. But what made that process a lot smoother for me and for Timothy, who assisted me with the caregiving of my parents, was that I was able to work with a local attorney to create a will, so that decisions were already made in advance. Those decisions included my mother and my father prior to their passing. And so that made all healthcare decisions very easy for me because I had already had discussions. And also, as we are living life, post their passing, decisions still have to be made. But because things were put in place, it makes some of those processes a lot smoother. So I am in the process of creating my will and working with Timothy to create his will. And August is National Create a Will Month. I would encourage you, if you have children, if you have loved ones, even if you don't have children, if you have pets, if you have an estate, whether it is a large estate or a smaller estate, if you have property, personal property, if you are facing a health issue now that perhaps only you know about, or even if you're just thinking about planning for your financial future, it is important for you to have a will. It's also important for me to have a will. So that's why I'm making this video, how to create a will. So several years ago, I actually started this process, but because I had a lot of different things going on, I bought some will kits from LegalZoom.com, which is where I go to for all of my legal related things as it relates to starting companies and businesses. I always use LegalZoom. And so I bought a couple of will kits, and so I said, okay, these have just been sitting out here. I didn't use them. Let me follow up with these and, just put this paperwork forward. Well, they said, you didn't use these in a couple of years. And so we kind of already pushed that through. Everything that you listed, we pushed it through. And so I was like, well, those are kind of null and void. Can I get a refund? Can I get some of my money back? They were like, no, but since you updated and revised and did make a payment, we will refund your payment. So those wills basically were null and void. And to me, they were just in draft form. So if you use LegalZoom or another online service, make sure you get your information in and secured and notarized within 30 days, because they will actually start the process for you, even if you just have it in the draft form. And that happened to me. So I had to go back and purchase more will kits. And the total purchase was $250 for two. I'm also going to go back at some point and or either upgrade probably for a nominal fee to get the full trust packages that are included in the estate planning bundle. So if you're going to get two wills, let's say for yourself and your partner, think about allocating $250. If you go to an attorney, I will tell you just for your will alone, it's going to cost you probably about $1,000 to $1,200. And if you are doing trust, that price is going to go up. And so if you know someone who you are assisting, or if it's just for yourself and you are able to use the computer, just go ahead and get this done online for yourself. Take those $250, and it's even less if it's just for you. And make sure you put your plan in place. And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I would share my screen with you all, but I've already put most of my information in my package, and so I don't want to share or disclose my personal information, but I will read some of the questions that are in each section of the will that I'm creating for myself and the one that I'm assisting Timothy with as he also creates his will. And again, we're doing this. We're at that age. My husband is 2 years away from being 50 years old. God willing, he make it, and I pray that I make it as well. So 44 this September. But we are at that age. My parents have gone home to Christ, and Tim's mother has passed. It's Mr. Reese, Mr. Woods. His father is, almost 81. I think. And so it is that time for us, those of us in our 40s, and perhaps you've already done this, good for you. I just haven't done it. And like I said, I started on it several years ago, but I didn't follow through with the process exactly. But what is a will? A will is very simply your official statement that in the event something happens to you, you expire from this earth, you leave this earth, what it tells your family, your friends, those who are in charge, of handling your estate, your exact plans. It's also your written communication to your family, to your friends, to those you love. This is your statement of what you want to happen with your home, your estate, what health decisions you want made on your behalf, what financial decisions you want made. Very simply, it's basically you telling the world what you want to happen to you, to your remains, what type of funeral you want, where do you want your money to be allocated, do you want to give it to charity, do you want to give friends and family, what happens if I die. That's what your will is outlining. And so it goes into effect once you do pass away. Now, a trust, on the other hand, takes everything you've outlined in that will, and this can occur while you are living. It just passes it on to the beneficiary, whether that's your child or a close relative, so that you can avoid probate court. Because once you die, and if you die with the will, sometimes the will can be challenged, and so it gets really murky when you start to deal with issues like that or disputes within the family. It has to go to probate court. But by having a trust in place, you're automatically stating that what I want to occur in my will, these things that I have outlined for myself, I want these things to happen. We're going to get this legally signed, notarized, and then these things will be automatically passed on to my beneficiary. And while I'm here, or even after you've passed, this is what I want to take place so that we can avoid the probate court. There should be no confusion about it. So it's good to have the will as well as the trust. And like I said, we're going to be talking about the will today. And I'm also going to, at some point in the future, move forward with a trust for myself and for Timothy as well. So again, I went through LegalZoom for my estate planning years ago. I've always used LegalZoom for pretty much incorporating all of my LLCs and things of that nature. So what questions am I asked as I'm working through my estate bundle? So I may look around a little bit, but that's because I'm looking at a different screen. So the first thing that pops up when I go to my screen, it says, let's start with the basics. What is your name? And here I just simply list my government name, okay? And this is just my first, middle, and last name. Very simple. And I will tell you, if you choose to go with LegalZoom Estate Bundle, and I'm not pushing any particular brand, I'm just saying who I'm using and who we are using. This is almost just like filling out a job application. It's just like a very much automated form. And once you enter your form, you're just moving on to the next question. Okay. So the first thing I was asked on this form, what is your name, first, middle, last? And if there's a suffix, you enter that. Okay. Save and continue. What is your date of birth? You enter that information. And I would encourage you to make sure you are using the information listed on your birth certificate and your driver's license so that there won't be any kind of discrepancies with what you have legally listed, in our in the social security system and in our governmental systems. Okay. The next question I'm asked is, what is your marital status? And so I list married for myself, and then it asks me about my spouse's name and birthday. I also use the same information that is legally listed for my spouse. What is my home address? I provide that information. As you can see, these are very basic questions, okay? Do you have any biological or adopted children? In my instance, I put no, okay? And so you would cater your responses to whatever your selection applies to you. So if you have biological and or adopted children, you would click on yes. And if you do click yes, it tells you to name the child's legal name and date of birth. And so it provides more options. So if you have 16 children, you can list all 16 there. So in my instance, I'm going to click no, and then I will go on to save and continue. And the thing I like about this LegalZoom option, you're constantly saving this information. All right, and then you can go back and edit it. But again, complete this within 30 days of purchasing your bundle, because LegalZoom will go ahead and legalize this process very quickly for you. The next question I am asked is, do I have pets? And it says, if you have yes, you can, if I indicate yes, I can list the pets and then I will add more about the pets. Okay. So in my instance, I say no. Hopefully one day this will be a dog. Tim does not like dogs. Okay. And so the next question is personal and family. That was all that was required for me to enter the beginning part of my will. So the next question that I'm going to be asked, the next questions relate to personal and family. Okay, very simple. So in this section, I'm going to be naming my legal representatives. And who are my legal representatives, or my legal representative? If I die, who will execute this will? For example, I was listed as my parents' executor of their will. Why? Because my parents were with me. I was taking care of my parents for a number of years. And while I do have a sister, if anything happened, and when things did happen, the doctors were primarily calling me. My sister lives in North Carolina. She was not really able to come down here to assist with a lot of the processes that I had to do. So I needed to be that person to make sure that these things were in place, and that if, in the event that my parents died, obviously they would be in my care, that I'm the person to make sure that things are executed, because I'm most familiar with all of their care, all of their financial needs and supports at this point. And had the situations been reversed, then perhaps Kanika would have done that. And so that's just kind of how it worked out in our instance. And so as you are thinking about representatives and who's going to serve as your representative, and we don't know a lot of times if we live to be 90. Sometimes we don't know because people die out. But think about it. Who is that person in your life now? That person you really trust, that person who's going to make sure, they have some level of computer literacy, because you are using an online platform. But that person who can make sure that this will is going to be accessible to them, and that they will follow through with everything you have outlined. So who is this person you trust? So let's get into some of these questions. And so it says, let's name the representatives. And LegalZoom does tell you this section will take about 5 minutes. So you can always leave and come back to this. And sometimes these things seem very hard because you're like, oh, I don't want to think about this. But it's important for us to really put these actions in place so that our loved ones are covered, that we are covered, and that no one is stressed out in the end. When my mother passed, like, it was kind of sudden. I mean, we knew that there was illness, but it was just all of a sudden one day she just suddenly got sick. And then on Friday she got sick, and Monday she had transitioned. But because things were put in place and had already had those conversations with my parents about their final wishes, what color do you want to wear? How do you want this? I already knew everything. I had already gone to the lawyers and gotten this stuff legally notarized. So it was just moving through those processes. All right. So let's name representatives. This section starts with, who do you want to nominate as the executor of your will? And so if you're like, well, I don't know what that means, it tells you exactly what this means. An executor must be an adult. This is what LegalZoom says. And they are named in a last will, and they're responsible for distributing the estate to beneficiaries based on what is in the will. Responsibilities may include managing estate finances, closing out the estate with the probate. And as I mentioned, I'm the executor of my parents' will. Who is the co-executor? So that means that if primary executor number one is not available, who will execute these plans? And that person would be the backup. You should also, it says that who should you nominate? This is typically someone who is trusted to handle financial responsibilities and likely to live longer than the person creating the will. Most people choose a family member or a close friend. So before choosing your executor, it's best to make sure that they are willing to take on the responsibility. The same person should not be listed as the primary and the backup executor. So these should be two different individuals. And again, I agree with everything they listed in LegalZoom. If a person has a lot of responsibilities or they're just not available, they do not need to be over your estate. It needs to be someone who really has a proclivity for business affairs and who really just has the time to take care of the affairs and to make sure that things are put in place. And this just keeps down a lot of confusion. So think about it. Who do you want to be the executor of your will? Will it be a family member or will it be a close friend? Okay. And so here I list the person who I will have, execute my will in the event of my death. And then there's also a space for a co-executor, as well as if you want to add a backup executor. So if the co-executor is not available, who is the backup? And so you move forward. The next question that I'm asked is, who do you want to nominate as your agent to make financial decisions on your behalf? And this is a very important question because when you start to work with the banks, if a person has passed away, once that Life 360 alerts, and I had heard of Life 360, but I really knew what it was when my dad died, because I was calling to this place and this place because I had to handle all this business. And I said, I'm notifying you that my father has passed his transition. And you need to do this for older people, especially because people can become very fraudulent with their accounts. And they were like, oh, we already knew because Life 360 lets us know when any veteran or any person basically dies. Life 360, an alert goes out, the hospital communicates. And so even with Vanderbilt, where my parents transitioned, if you don't list yourself like as a person to kind of still follow up in their records or have yourself listed as a person who can still manage their records, those accounts are shut down instantly. And that happened with my dad. And I was so upset. I was like, wait a minute, he just passed away. I want to go back and look at his last vitals to see his last. They were like, So I had forgotten, because I was the main one operating the account, I had actually forgotten to list myself as a person over the account. It was in his name. And so I couldn't access his records, but they're still on file. I can just go down and request them. But so keep these things in mind. Once the person dies, it is a call that goes out through Life 360, and that alerts financial institutions, banks, your pension, everybody that this person is deceased. And so be aware of that. Okay, so the question is, who do you want to nominate as your financial, agent? And so you would list that person. And so this says, what can this agent do? This is a person who has been given the authority to act on a principal's behalf by a power of attorney document. The principal is a person who assigns an agent to act on their behalf. Okay, so basically an agent is known as an attorney in fact. Okay, and so this also applies to co-agent. So it says, if married, our spouses automatically each other's financial power of attorney. Being married doesn't automatically give someone legal authority over their spouse's finances. So again, if you are married, you would need to name this person who you want to be as your financial power of attorney. So who should be named as an agent? It is important that you name someone you trust. An agent is legally required to act in your best interest and to keep records of all transactions. An agent must never mix up your property with their own or engage in any conflicts of interest. And this can happen as well. And so it's important to try to keep things separate to the extent that you can. But I know sometimes when you are caregiving, and even in my instance, like sometimes I would say, you know what, I'm just not going to use resources for my parents. I'm going to pay for this out of my own pocket. And so sometimes your money does get mixed up a little bit, but you try to keep it as separate as you can. And I know that same thing happened. For example, my mother, Cassie, and her sister Constance, for many years, they were my grandmother's primary caregivers. And I remember a lot of times, if mom had her mother for 5 months or 6 months, that checkbook went with my mother. And when my grandmother went back with my Aunt Constance, that checkbook went with her. And if she had to go to my Aunt Alice's house, her checkbook moved, but oftentimes they would often pay for things out of pocket. And then later my mom would say, well, Constance, just write me a check for that $100 or $200 later, but I just paid for it from Medea. And so that occurs a lot of times, but there has to be a level of trust because oftentimes caregivers, you are paying for so much out of your pocket because caring for elderly people is very, very expensive. So again, the person who's handling finances has to be a person who is a good receipt keeper, and I have all receipts, okay, from years and years and years, and also a person who is not going to abuse the accounts. And I just personally believe that when you're doing things like that, it's always going to come back on you. But keep in mind when you're doing, especially if you're doing caregiving, appointing a financial power of attorney is going to be important because you can't be expected to manage your household and take care of their finances and all their bills as well because somebody's household is not going to be well maintained. Okay, so let's look at the next question. Okay, and so once you do, you can nominate your healthcare agent. So after you do that financial agent, they ask you, who do you want to be your healthcare agent? And you guys, this is so important. And I've already nominated, my healthcare agent, but your health agent is that person who is going to make decisions for you. As I told you, you all, my parents, have been sick. And so, but I had already had discussions with them. Mommy, what do you want? Daddy, what do you want? And for me, those conversations weren't hard because I don't know, I just because I grew up with the older grandparents around me, I'm just a person, and I've always kind of been a person. I like to kind of put stuff in place, get things done. And there were times when my parents were a little bit resistant to having this conversation. Even my aunt Constance, I remember trying to talk to her about a will. She really didn't want to just like have the conversation. I remember her saying to me, "Shiny, it's just what happened. What happened?" I was like, Constance, you do not let whatever happened just happen. No, but that generational thing. Like I'm just gonna trust my brothers and sisters, and I'm just gonna trust my family. I think that's so nice and honorable and respectful and so kind to want to trust your family members to put everything in place for you. But you do not know how people really um, behave in times of crises, and sometimes what you think you would do, what you might do for them, they may not necessarily do for you. Okay, so it's important for us to have our decisions and our choices and what we want to happen for our body, for our health, to be put in a legal way so that if the rubber hits the road, the family members or the loved ones, if they are stressed out, the decision is already made by me. Okay. So let's look at that. So, who do you want to nominate as your healthcare agent to make decisions on your behalf? And it tells you why. And so, a health agent is an adult who has the legal authority to make decisions like determining whether to continue life sustaining treatment when the principal can no longer speak for themselves. And I'm going to tell you, this was very important when both my parents are passing because, when you start to pass, your body is shutting down. And you can lose your ability to communicate and speak for yourself. And so, because things were already put in place for my parents, I already knew like we are not having a lot of extreme interventions with them. We're going to let them go home in peace and move them to hospice. And I can remember one doctor was saying to me, "Well, your mother needs to be able to make the," and I just kind of looked at him and I was like thinking to myself, if you don't get the hell up out this room right now, you ain't telling me nothing, baby, because I'm looking at my mother, my sweet mother, and I'm seeing that my mother is transitioning. You're not about to just fatten your pockets at the expense of her life. And so be mindful of that too. It's important to have your health agent in place and your ideas in place for what you want to happen. If you are dealing with an illness that is incurable, do you really want to be sticking around here? You want your family to have to go through that struggle of watching you slowly deteriorate and to just be going through life support and all of these things? My mother had a subdural hematoma, and what that means is she had blood, basically on her brain. It just happened, but it was the cause of that was because she was on blood thinners, and that can happen when you've had some serious health issues like she had. And so, was I going to give my mother brain surgery, which was the only option to reduce this blood? No, I was not. And we had already had a conversation about that. My dad was his kidneys. My dad had kidney disease. Was I going to try to miraculously put him on a kidney donor list when my dad is I'm 74 years old and my mother is 77, and they've already had a complicated medical health history. So those are things you have to really think about. And I know that at the end, doctors, they're all about life preserving, but sometimes doctors can really, if a doctor's not operating in your best interest, when the family is very vulnerable, you can be putting your family member into a surgery that they don't need because they are going to transition anyway. And so you really have to have this in place. And I can say that from personal experience. And so, no, I advocate for my parents. I'm like, I hear what you're saying, but we're going to go with what we've already discussed. And that was the plan. We're executing the plan that was already discussed. Okay. And my mother did slip into a coma, so there was no need for her to be going through extra, suffering or pain. I mean, she was not suffering, but it was a peaceful passing for both my parents. Okay, so you appoint your health attorney, your health agent, excuse me, as well as the co-agent. Okay. And so I'm just kind of sharing what was real for me because I just think it's important for us to have these honest conversations. Okay. So that was all on the representative. The next thing you're going to be talking about as you're thinking about your will are the gifts. Who do you want to give gifts to? Okay. So it said, who should get your assets? You can pass down your assets in two ways: by making specific designations for your assets. Let me log back in. 1 minute. LegalZoom locked me out of here. Okay. Let me go back here. It says that you can allocate your assets in two ways. Number one, by making specific gifts to chosen individuals, or by designating beneficiaries to receive your remaining assets. So let's start this section. And it asks very simple questions. The first question is how do you want your assets to be distributed? It says that if you want to give assets to certain people, you can do that later. And so it tells you, so if you have a question like, well, what does this mean? LegalZoom really does a good job of explaining everything. All you have to do is just click on the button and it explains every single question that is being asked of you. So this says, do I give everything to my spouse? Well, it says giving everything to your spouse means that your spouse will receive all of your assets without any restrictions. If your spouse passes away before you do, you will need to select a backup beneficiary, and this will be asked of you in the next section. So what does it mean to give everything to my biological children and or adopted children? So giving everything to your children means they will receive all assets in equal amounts, okay? So if one of your kids passes away before you, their portion would go first, their portion would go to their children. So let's say you have 3 kids, and let's say your oldest child passes away at perhaps, you know, uh, 35, but they also had kids. Their portion would go to their children. So if your child who passed away has no children of their own, their portion would then go to their siblings. Okay. So what if you have stepchildren? To give assets to stepchildren, you should customize who receives these assets. Also, please note that in this will, if you want to disinherit someone, or you want to say, I don't want my kids to have anything, or I don't want my sibling, I don't want my relative, I don't want anyone to have anything, or I'm disinheriting 15 or 20 people, you can list all of that. And I was like, wow, that's pretty deep, but it gets murky, when we start talking about debt. So, okay, so how do you want your assets to be distributed? You have the option, number one, to give everything to your spouse, or number two, to customize your distribution. Okay, and so it says that in the case of the beneficiary you chose, whether this is your children or whether it's your spouse or someone else, if this person dies before you do, who should get their assets? And so you can list this information as well. Okay, and you can give it to a charity or you can give it to a person, and you can allocate the amount. And if you have a question there, it explains that question and tells you, what does this mean? What's a remainder beneficiary? So this is a person who is a residual beneficiary. It is a person or an organization like a charity who will receive assets from the will or trust. And what's a backup beneficiary? In the event the first beneficiary passes away, the backup will receive the first choice beneficiary portion. So it gets a little kind of complicated there, but it's important for you to put your ideas down, your thoughts down, so that your beneficiaries are honored in the way that you want to honor them. Okay. So let's look at who would you like to give specific assets to certain people or charities? You can say no, or you can say yes. And this just talks about, for example, Grandpa Matt is preparing the will. In his will, he leaves his nephew his particular baseball signed by Babe Ruth. He leaves the rest of his assets to be distributed to his children equally. So if there's specific things like a gold watch, or I want to make sure my nephew gets $1,000, or I want to make sure this person receives $500, you can become very specific in your request during this portion. So for in my instance, I just put no. Okay, and then LegalZoom asks you, do you want to add more provisions to the will at no charge? So for example, if you are leaving money to a person who will their money will need to be held in a trust, and this could be because someone is under the age of under they're not an adult yet. You can say yes, I want a trust put in place, and a trust allows for them to use this money like for their education, so forth and so on. And you can also distribute the funds to this person at 2 to 3 particular times in their life. So let's say when the person is 25, they receive $1 million. When they turn 35, they receive $5 million. When they turn 40, they receive the last portion of their inheritance, or the money I'm leaving them. Okay, so that was all. So the next section is financial decisions. Okay, who will authorize your financial decisions? And so it says, before we look at the details, let's see if everything looks right. So again, LegalZoom is asking you, do you want to see a summary of what you've put in here? Does it look right? Is it feeling safe? Is it feeling comfortable? Is it reading the way you want it to read? And so you can click on a little summary link and it will allow you to do that. So again, this agent you're talking about is going to be able to make financial decisions for you. So when do you want your agent to be able to start making financial decisions? And it tells you when the document is signed, meaning now while you're here, or when the principal is incapacitated, meaning when you can't speak or communicate. Most people make this decision when they are incapacitated, unless you want them to start making decisions for you now. So think about that. So typically, you will still need to handle your bank accounts until you get to a point where you cannot handle them. There's no need for anyone else to handle my bank accounts or my financial decisions at this point, because I'm still in my right mind. And so once you become incapacitated or unable to speak for yourself, then your agent will step in. Okay. And so you can select how you want that done, now or when you are incapacitated. Okay. So what decisions do you want your financial agent to be able to make? And so it provides a long list, a 2-page list. And I'll just read those: real estate, personal property, banking, stocks, bonds, transactions, business, retirement plans, insurance and annuities, estate and trust, legal, government assistance, personal and family care, gifts, pets, and animals. And so for me, I will select all. And so the list kind of continues to go on. And then it asks, will the agent be allowed to financially benefit from any transaction taken on your behalf? It says generally agents are not allowed to financially benefit from any actions on your behalf. Some people let their agents financially benefit if that person is a spouse or a close family member. So basically, do you want them to be able to, use some money if they have to use some money, or gain any particular benefit if they're making a transaction on your behalf? So in this instance, you can select yes or no. So do you want your agents to be able to make gifts to themselves using your funds? So it says that some people let the agents make their gifts if it's a spouse or a close family member. So basically, you are deciding how lenient you want your financial agent to be able, how flexible you want them to be able to really utilize the financial resources that are available, to them once you are incapacitated, or if you say now, if you give them permission now, do they have full reign over your account? So that's why most people select, my financial agent can't really make decisions until I'm incapacitated, because, I still need to have access over my money. I'm not giving someone free reign over my money or over my bank accounts or over my retirement. And so you make those decisions, that you feel are most appropriate for your situation. And so the next question is, do you want to add specific financial instructions or restrictions that your agent can make? And so it says, for example, under no circumstances do I want my agent to drive or make repairs to my 2016 Ford Mustang. So these are things you want to think about, and you can say yes or no. And the next question is, do you want this power of attorney to replace any pre-existing powers of attorney? And I would say yes in this instance, because even if you never had one, just say yes. But if you've been married a couple of times, or you've had previous wills in previous years and you don't know what those wills spell out, you need to make sure that you are operating and moving forward with the most current will that reflects your current wishes, because you may have made a will when you were 20 years old and now you're 50 years old. Life circumstances have changed. Maybe you have kids, maybe you have more assets. So you want things to reflect where you are in your current state of mind. And if you're not married to someone who you were married to before, you certainly don't want that old will to be put in place. And so, yes, this will override anything that I perhaps previously created. Okay. And it says, as the last step, we'll cover all medical decisions. And so, as you can see, this moved through pretty easily. Okay. And so this goes into healthcare decisions. Okay. Confirm that the agents you choose are allowed to make healthcare decisions on your behalf. This includes medical treatment and end of life care. This takes about 5 minutes. Okay. So it says, before we move forward, does everything look right? Remember, the healthcare agent is going to be able to make decisions about your life sustaining care when you are incapacitated. And so you've already listed this agent's information. In some instances, this will be your spouse or sibling or someone who is an adult who you trust. So the question is, if you need life support, how do you want to proceed? And it gives you options and it breaks it down. Okay. So this means that if a person needs life support, their preference is to be put on life support no matter the situation. They won't be able to choose specific situations where they may want to stop life support. So you really need to think about that. Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be on life support? Because my parents had really serious health issues, and because I'm a social worker, I was very much like DNR, do not resuscitate. And I had conversations with them. And a lot of people don't tell you, and I learned this from a training that I was in Birmingham on end of life planning for social workers, for palliative social workers, when I worked in mental health. They don't tell you that when you are resuscitating a person, you're also intubating them, and often those compressions break their ribs. So you really have to think about it. Do I want someone who's aging and sick to be in a state where their ribs are broken, because of those compressions to revive them, to try to resuscitate them? Okay, the ribs are potentially broken, they're intubated, they have a tube down their throat. Do I want that for my parents or my loved one, or do I want them to, die with a sense of less pain and less suffering? Because that is a painful process. And so keep those things in mind. And I learned from that session, this was about maybe 9 years ago, the woman who was presenting said most doctors opt for DNR. They do not, doctors themselves do not even want to be resuscitated. Now, if it's something where, you're young and there's an opportunity to save your life, I think that that's a choice that you all have to make as a family. But if you are a person who's facing a terminal illness, or, it's a possibility that you could have a seizure or brain trauma at any point from whatever, situation you're dealing with, or you may go out of consciousness. Do you really want to be resuscitated when you are facing a serious medical issue or the end of your life anyway? So those are decisions that we all have to make. Okay. And so the options are continued life support under any circumstance, even if it looks like I'm not, just put me on life support. And the other is to set restrictions on life support treatment. And for me, set the restrictions. Okay. So since you want to set those restrictions, when do you want to stop life support? And they give you three options. You can select all three, or you can only select the one that applies for you. And those options are: if I'm permanently or persistently unconscious, yes, I checked it. If I become terminally ill or injured, right. If I'm terminally ill and the doctors have given me a prognosis of you have, 6 months, I don't want to be on life support. I want to be in hospice, palliative care. I want comfort measures if I have an end stage illness or condition. And so in my instance, I just checked all three. So even though you want to stop life support, and this is the next question, even though you want to stop life support, in certain situations, do you still want to receive things to ease discomfort? And I will tell you, just based on my experience, if a person is transferred to hospice, comfort measures will be provided to you and your loved one. And so the options you can check include a feeding tube, CPR, artificial respiration, and the treatment of new conditions. And so keep this in mind: if a person is transitioning anyway, do you want them to have a feeding tube? Because keep this in mind. When you are dying, the first organ, one of the first organs that it starts to decline is your stomach. So you're not hungry, right? If they're saying, we see that this person is transitioned, there's really not a need for more food because you are dying, your body is physically dying, and the stomach is the first place to go. And then if you start to take additional hospice related medicines, those things stop the flow with your stomach anyway. So do you want the CPR to be resuscitated? I just talked about that. Do you want artificial respiration, intubation, tubes? How do you want your life to end if you have some level of control over that? And think about your family as you're making this decision as well. Me, let me die in peace. Do you want to be an organ donor? In my case, I said no, I do not. My parents were not. Okay, just bury me. Do you want do you want to add specific medical instructions and restrictions on decisions your agent can make? And so you have to say yes or no here. And then, I did type out my wishes, what I want. I put that I want to be in hospice, X, Y, and Z, so forth and so on, if possible. And I just said, my health proxy can make these decisions, X, Y, and Z. So I kind of use AI a little bit to help me generate my statements. But typically, I made it very clear what I wanted in my final time, if I'm able to sort of, die in hospice, or, have a death where, I'm in palliative or something like that. I don't want my family to be suffering. I don't want to linger on, let me go to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Okay. And so how do you want your remains to be handled? This is also a big question, and people need to talk about this, because it's like, well, a funeral is very expensive. Okay, funerals are very costly. If you have young children, do you have a life insurance policy? Are things in place for your young kids to take care of this costly funeral that you want? And if no, then your option is cremation. Okay, that's just what it is. And and so the options they give in how do you want your remains to be handled: a burial, which is a traditional funeral, and those are very costly, or a cremation. And I would also add that when you're thinking about a traditional burial, oftentimes the life insurance policies, you can present them at the funeral home, but in most instances, they like to reimburse you. So you're paying money up front. You're going to need money up front. So think about it. If you don't have a will in place and you got some teenage kids and something happens to you, are they going to know what you want, mom? Are they going to know what you want, dad? Do your kids know what you want, what your wishes are? And so don't leave that burden on your family members by not having a will in place. I had this conversation with my parents, so I knew my mama wanted to be buried in pink. I knew she want her funeral to be done in a very classy way. And my dad had already told me navy blue, and I was joking with him. And I said, Dad, I'm gonna have this horse and he's like, keep it simple and go on, just put me in the ground. And my dad was like, this simple, put me in the ground, because they didn't want us to be like having this, just is so and sorrowful because they're with their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And another thing my mother has always told me, which is why I wanted their funerals to, I didn't want a lot of resolutions read. I said, no, 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 no. One resolution was snuck in, and I don't know. I had told the lady specifically, I said, please do not read the resolution from Mount Zion. But all the rest of these, I've been to funerals that are 3 hours long. Do not read all those things. One of them got in, and I don't know, and I know I told her, I asked her specifically, do not read this resolution. But I had said, don't read any of these. But I'm so grateful for everyone who wrote them. But my mother has always told me long funerals are hard on the family. And boy, if that's not the truth. So keep the funerals to, celebrate life. That's my position. But, you know, it's important to let the dead go ahead and be in the ground. That's just my position now. I was watching a funeral about 2 summers ago, and that funeral was 4 hours long. And everybody kept saying the same thing. And it's kind of like after a while, that funeral is not for the deceased because the deceased can't hear you. That funeral, those words are just for the people in the audience. And I realized that, especially when my parents died. So my position is if you didn't say what you needed to say to them while they were here on earth, the funeral is not the time for you to be getting up and showboating and saying everything that you want to say to the audience because we know who those people are. So that's why it's important to tell people what you want to tell them while they are here, while they get live. I had already given my mom and dad flowers, praise, told them everything in their ear every night, that how much I love them and cherish them and adore them. And so their funeral was just me bringing closure and bringing honor and dignity to the beautiful lives that they live. So you think about that. How do you want your funeral to be if you have a burial? And if you want to be cremated, how do you want your remains to be taken care of? Who will they go with? Don't leave these decisions up to people when they are in an emotional state because they're going to mess it up for you and it's going to cause conflict with the family. And I'm going to tell you, when people start dying, conflict arises in families. So you list out where you want to be buried and make sure the right people have this information because otherwise everybody is going to fall out about it and it's going to be a big disservice to your family members that you love so much. So take that $250, get you and your partner a will, and then when you get some more money, go ahead and buy that trust and put everything in place, okay? And so then after that, what you do with LegalZoom, you just generate your documents. And I'm not going to generate because I still have a few more sections that I need to revisit. But that was creating the will. And as you can see on this recording, we've been on for about 48 minutes right about now. So 1 hour of your time and maybe stretching this out to 2 or 3 days just to make sure you read and reread and that you have talked to people saying, hey, these are my wishes. If something happens to me, I want you to move forward. And also you need to make sure that once you generate this will, you are printing it out, signing it. It has to be notarized, and LegalZoom tells you the steps to do. LegalZoom will actually print it out and send it to you for a nominal fee on really nice paper. But I'm not going to do that because I have printers and things here, and so I'm just going to get my will notarized. And if you want to know where a notary is, you can go to your local library or go downtown to the local courthouse. There's a notary on duty, or you can use notary.com online. And I'm telling you, when it comes to legal stuff, use online services, pay $25, get your items notarized, and move on to the next level. You can do it quietly and move on. Because I remember trying to get some legal documents signed. I was going to the library to use a notary, and she just gave me something. I was like, why didn't I just go to use my online account that I use all the time? And you just forget these things when you are in grief and trying to handle paperwork. So this is another reason why I'm saying put things in place and in order, because when grief starts to set into your heart, it's hard to move forward with legal paperwork, with legal documents, with probate court. It's very overwhelming. So I hope this has been a helpful Zoom to you, and that, by sharing a little bit of my story and my experience, that, you all can understand why it's so important, not only for me and Tim to have our wills together, but for you as my cousins to have your will and things in place as well. So until the next time, Be safe and take care of yourselves, and make sure you're doing everything to take care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit. And I want to let you know I'm very proud of you for taking this step to create your own will, because you are doing something that many people before you never did, and they didn't know how to do it. And I'm happy to support you in your process. So just know you're doing well. And even if it takes you a little bit of time, that's okay. Just make sure you get it done for your peace of mind, but also for the peace of mind of your loved ones, and for those who will still be here taking care of your affairs once you leave this earth. Take care and have a beautiful day.